I'm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee workshop. Not long ago, while I was in southeastern Massachusetts, I stopped in at Leonard's Antiques and visited our old friend Jeff Jenkins. Now, not only does he sell antiques, but he sells some beautiful antique reproductions. I asked him if he had something that we might be able to put a TV in, sort of like an entertainment center, and he showed us a beauty. So after we go there, we're going to come back here, and because the project is a little complicated, it's going to take 2 episodes. Today will be part 1. You won't want to miss it. Next, right here in the new Yankee workshop. But Jeff, do you get much call from people that want a cupboard to put their TV in and all the related video equipment?
Next to king-size beds, Norm, that's probably the second most asked question.
Really?
What we do is things like armoires. We outfit them for electronics.
You know, armoires are so big, I just can't imagine trying to haul a piece like that up to a second-floor bedroom.
Can be tricky. Here's this little smaller one, a French faux bamboo one.
That's nice, with a mirror on the front.
Yeah. This is an English one. Drawers below.
Now, see, I like this because the drawers give you a place to store and organize videotapes and DVDs, and you can get at them easily. But the problem with these antiques is that the doors, they don't swing out of the way. They're always flopping around. Yeah. And with today's TVs that are huge, they're never deep enough. I mean, that's only 17 inches. That's not going to take a big screen TV. And I imagine this is not inexpensive.
I'm not sure. It's $10,500. Is that a problem?
That's a lot. So what do you do?
Well, what we've done, we've dealt with this before. We take the idea of a chest and a cupboard, reproportioned it for today's electronics, and I happen to have one over on the repro side.
I'd love to see that.
Sure.
So what species of wood would you use for a cupboard like this?
Well, most were made in mahogany, and you could still use that. I prefer cherry, pine, maple, or how about tiger maple?
Ah, nice.
Recognize the bed?
I sure do. This is the 4-poster canopy we built.
Right.
All set up with the linens. It looks great.
We're very happy with this bed.
This looks like it's got just the right proportions.
We've got the chest with the cupboard above. That'll hold all the things you don't want people to see, tapes, wires, just about anything, and cupboard above for your television.
And you've got some nice hinges that allow the door to swing all the way around, so it's out of the way.
Right out of the way. You can sit anywhere in the room and look at the television.
And you've made it in 2 pieces, so it's easier to move around.
Yes, just screw it together when you get it in place. The shelves are adjustable, so you can drop the bottom shelf down right on top of your players or whatever boxes you might have to run the television. The shelf above would be lowered to the top of the television. At home, I've used leather books surrounding it, so the idea is to be just as good looking open as it is closed.
Yeah, that's why the inside is all nicely finished. Let's check out the depth on this. 20 inches, that'll handle just about any of the new TVs.
Real, just about anything.
Nice. I'll take a few more measurements.
Right. If you like it, Norm, be my guest.
Well, here it is, our version of the media press. Media, because we're going to put a TV inside. And press, because the piece was inspired by an old linen press, where they would take folded linens and store them on shelves. Now, there's adjustable shelves in the upper section, and down below, 4 good-sized drawers for all the DVDs and CDs and things associated with media. The piece is made up of solid maple and some maple veneer plywood. If you'd like to build your own version of the media press, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, I want to start with the lower case. This piece is actually built in 2 sections so that it's easier to move around. And if I pull out the drawer, you can see that there's a frame in here. It's made out of plywood, it supports the drawer, and it ties in the sides. Those frames are made up of birch plywood, which has been ripped to width, and they're connected with a tongue and groove joint. I want to make the groove first, so I've set up the dado, and what I'll do is run the piece through, turn it around, run it through again, centering the groove. But before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. I've made a test tongue on a piece of scrap, and I want it to be just snug enough so that there's room for the glue. To make the tongue, I've widened the dado, installed a sacrificial fence, and it's just a matter of a pass on each side to make that tongue. Well, now we're going to connect the pieces with some glue. Now, the clamps are just to pull the joints tightly together while I check it for square. The diagonals are equal, so now I can pin it with some brads. Here are the sides for that base cabinet, and I'm laying out for the dust frame grooves. I want to make sure that they're absolutely aligned. So I'm using a piece of scrap plywood to transfer the line from one panel to the other. Now, we've learned the hard way that sometimes our dust frames have a slight bow in them, and that presents problems later. So what I'm doing is taking the plywood back and putting marks at the exact location of these dados so I can transfer a line across the back and straighten the frame when I nail it. Now it's just a matter of putting some glue in the dado, slipping in that frame, just make sure that it's set squarely to the side, and then I'll secure it by toenailing some brads. Now it's a matter of taking what I've built so far, flipping the whole assembly over, trying to get it in all the grooves of the other side. Now for the back. I've applied a bead of glue on all those frames and the side. And what I'm going to do is tack it flush to the top to start. All right, 51 9/16, that's square. So I'll secure it with a couple tacks, and all four corners are right. Now for that potential problem we spoke about earlier, bowed frames. Now I don't see my line, so I'm going to push it down. Ah, there it is. Now I can bring it back, and I can secure this frame. With the case now flipped up, I can see the lines for the intermediate frames. If I let this one go, it comes right up to the line, so I can tack it. All right, one more frame. I don't even see the line on this top one, but if I take a clamp and go to the one that's already fixed, I can just crank it down. See, it's bowed. There's the line. Now I can secure it. Now, if you think we're being fussy, if I don't straighten these frames now, the drawers won't fit, and then I'll have to modify them, and that's a pain. Well, while I still have the dado set up, I want to build the basic box of the upper section of our media press. The last thing we did for the bottom was to make a rabbet for the plywood back, so let's do that first. Now this is a much simpler carcass. All I need is a rabbet at the bottom for this shelf and a rabbet at the top for the top of the cabinet. Now here I've laid out and I'm now pre-drilling some holes for screws to assemble the case. None of these screws are going to show in the finished piece. Okay, that should do it. There's a solid wood face frame that attaches to the plywood carcass. It has stiles and rails. Now the joints between those stiles and rails have to be very precise and square, and every piece has to be the exact same length. To accomplish that, I'm using a state-of-the-art miter gauge, which has an extension and a stop. I can cut pieces up to 42 inches long with this. What I do is take a rail, put it in place, and square one end. With that end square, I can flip it around, drop the stop, slide it up against it, and make the other cut. Now I know that every single rail is precisely the same length. Now here I'm making a dry fit of the face frame, and I like to use these spacer blocks rather than making measurements trying to line everything up. And I test it to make sure everything's nice and even when it's squeezed together, and that's perfect. Now the joints I'm going to secure with pocket screw technology. All right, I'm going to add a little glue, although the glue doesn't add much strength to this joint. It's all in the screws. And what I like to do is just clamp the two pieces so that I know the surfaces are flush. It's easier to hold. And then the screw is a special screw. It's a pan head with a self-drilling tip, and that works great in this hardwood. To attach the face frame to the carcass, I'm going to use biscuits and glue. That's what these slots are for. No mechanical fasteners. So now we'll see if it all fits together. And when I get it in place, I'll clamp it. All right, with everything clamped up, we'll let it set up overnight. We'll get back to this project tomorrow. That's what I want. Nice and smooth and even. Now these strips of poplar are important. They go on top of those plywood frames, just about flush with the stile, and that's going to guide the side of the drawer so that it goes in and out of the case straight. How often have you seen someone trying to pull a drawer or put it into an antique and it's cockeyed and wedged? It's often because these guides are either missing or they were never there. The next guides for the drawers are these 1-inch thick pieces that sit under the frame, and they're even with this rail, and that keeps the drawer from tipping out as it's open. Let's take another look at our prototype and check out some of the details of the upper case. One of the things that I did is added a piece of 1/4 inch by 1 1/4 maple that serves two purposes. It covers the core of the plywood side, and it conceals the adjustable shelf standard. Here's one of those pieces, and because it's so thin, I can't use biscuits. I'll have to use a mechanical fastener, a 5/8 inch brad. This strip of maple will cover the front edge of the bottom shelf. It will be seen. And up here at the top, another strip that's just a filler to make it come even with the stile. Now let's add this piece, a rail that sits on top of the pieces I just installed. Some end grain will show, and that's okay. I'm going to nail it in place because the nails will be concealed by the molding later. The next piece to add goes behind that rail that I just installed, and it's going to act as a stop for the doors. Now to set the distance, I'm just using a scrap of MDF that's a 1/2 inch thick. Let's take another look at the prototype and check out the shelf system. On a lot of antiques, you start to see the earliest version of an adjustable shelf. And it's pretty ingenious and simple. It's a set of standards with these cross cleats, which you can move from one location to another. And the standard is simply notched every 3 inches on center to give you that variation. It's simple and it works great. The standards start out as some 1/2 inch thick, 1 1/4 wide pieces of maple. I'm going to gang them together. I'm just going to slide them up against my fence, take a square, line them up, and then put a spring clamp on them, one on each end. And for good measure, I'm going to wrap some masking tape on the ends just to hold them in place. Now with my bandsaw and a miter gauge, I'm able to make this little 45-degree angle cut to remove the rest of the material. Now here I'm just drilling a through hole with a counterbore for the screws that we'll use to attach the standards. I'm using screws to attach these standards to make it easier when I get to the finishing room. I want to take these off. It would be difficult to stain around all these notches. When it's finished, I'll reinstall them, and then I'll plug these holes with some bungs. These horizontal supports are just clipped at 45 degrees, and they simply sit in the notches. Now for a couple shelves. 3/4 inch birch plywood, and I have to make a notch at each back corner to fit around the standard. At the front edge of the shelf, a nice hefty piece of maple, glued and nailed, and it's held back at the end so that it'll fit around the standard. Let's take another look at the prototype. We removed the top cabinet so we could show you the transition between the two. The base gets what you might call a top, except that it's not solid. It's just 4 pieces put together, leaving a hole in the middle. Now what I've done is cut my pieces to length and marked out the location for some pocket screws. I'm going to use the same technology as I did on the face frame to connect it. So we'll cut the slots first. Now note that we're using square drive screws here. There's less chance of the bit slipping with this type of head. For the edge detail of this assembly, I need to cut a profile that has a cove and then a round over. I'll do that at the router table. Now that bit does a nice job, but there's a little bit of fuzziness. I was removing a lot of material. So what I'm going to do is raise the bit just a fraction and make a cleaning pass. Now these holes will allow me to secure the top with some screws. Now some 2 1/4 inch screws through those holes will secure that top. It's not going to go anywhere. With the 2 cases properly aligned and oriented, I'm now going to take a pencil and mark out the opening in that top on the bottom of the upper case. Now I'm going to install these plywood cleats, and I'm going to keep them just inside the line a bit. And what these will actually do is make it easier to orient the cabinet in the future. All right, let's see if we can get this thing on here. That makes it easy to set it in place. Now it's time to start working on the cornice molding. We need to make some of this. It's a nice molding. It has a thumbnail at the top, a little step down, a very deep cove, and then a little step here. To mill it, I'm going to use this molding machine. I faxed the profile that I wanted up to our knife cutter. They cut the knives and had them back to me in about 24 hours, and I've mounted those in the machine. Now, the machine cannot take all this material away in one pass. We have to do some work first to the raw material, which is this 2x4 maple. And what I want to do is make a couple bevel cuts so that I begin to reduce the amount of material that that knife is going to have to carve away. So I've set the saw blade at 30 degrees, and I'm going to run the piece through on edge. Now that takes care of the first cut. If I put my sample here, you can see I have to knock off this back corner. That's also 30 degrees. I just have to change the rip fence location. Now I've set up my dado, and I'll probably make about 3 passes to remove even more material before we head over to the molder. Well, that's all the material that I can remove at the table saw. Now I have to set up this fixture. I need something to guide the material under that knife, otherwise it'll wander side to side. So it has a couple side pieces attached to a piece of plywood, and then I use these scraps from when I made the blank to give me support underneath, sort of a V shape. I'll clamp that to the table, we'll button it up, and run a sample. All right, there's my test piece. That looks pretty good. Now we can run our stock through. Now I'm just going to crank it down a hair and make the final cleaning pass. All right, we're making some progress. Next time, we'll install that cornice molding. Then I'll make a bead that's going to wrap the bottom edge. We'll build our panel doors. And we'll work on these drawers, which have all dovetail joinery. We'll install the brasses on the drawer fronts. Down here, we have a molding to make that we can do on our router table. And these fancy feet, that's another job for our molding machine. So until next time, I'm Norm Abram for the New Yankee Workshop. Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the New Yankee Workshop. Today we continue with part 2 of our media press project. We'll be making some very fancy decorative feet, dovetail drawers, flat panel doors, as well as a cornice molding. And of course, we're going to have to put the finish on this piece. There's a lot to do. That's next, right here in the New Yankee Workshop. Well, here's what we're going to build. This is the prototype unit, and it was inspired by a visit to Jeff Jenkins at Leonard's Antiques down in Seekonk, Massachusetts. And what Jeff did is he took antiques and resized them for today's media packages. So up top, we have a couple doors that swing all the way around. So they're out of the way, giving you a clear view into a nice deep cabinet, which will take today's modern TVs. And there's plenty of room for a DVD player or a VCR. Down below, storage for the CDs and DVDs. And there's even room for a few of your plaid shirts. Nice brasses and decorative feet which support the whole unit. Now last time we built the carcasses, or the boxes, made out of plywood and then applied solid maple face frames in a draw support system. We also installed a very simple shelf support system, notched pieces of wood with these little sticks onto which we can set a nice heavy plywood shelf that will support the TV. Now, what I want to do today is come back to the base and start working on the feet. And what I do is mold a piece. Here's one of the ones for the one we're working on today. Cut out its decorative shape. Then I miter the corners and pre-assemble them before I attach them to the cabinet. Now to mill this, I need to start working with a blank of material. It's a 5/4 stock. I've laid out the material I want to remove. And my molder is not able to take all of that off in one pass. So what I want to do is go to the dado and remove some of this material. But before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Last time we used the molding machine to make the cornice molding. Since that time, I've installed another set of knives. I fax the profile to the supplier. They ground the knives and ship them to me. Then I mount 2 knives in a head which spins at very high speed, removing the material. Now these rollers, those yellowish colored rollers, actually move the material under the knife. Now I need a guide to make sure the stock stays straight under the knife. So what I like to do is take a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, mount a couple guide strips on each side, and that ensures me it's going to go straight through. Well, now that I have a blank, I can lay it out. And I'm going to do that on the back side. I have a template that I took off of the original, and I just trace that outline, and then I head over to the bandsaw. For the areas that the spindle sander can't get, a little handwork will take care of that. With all my pieces nicely sanded, we've taken the base of the prototype and flipped it up on some sawhorses so I can show you what's going on underneath here. There's a lot happening. There are some plywood fillers to bring it even with the face frame. There are these poplar blocks which attach the foot assembly to the carcass. And in the corner, there's this post, which is sort of like a glue block, but it's longer than the foot assembly. That way, when you slide the piece around or when it's resting in place, the pressure is on the post rather than the decorative element. Now, the first thing I want to do is make this miter cut, and I want it to be very crisp, and I want no gaps, no filler allowed. Everyone's eye is going to go right to that first. I've tilted my saw blade to 45 degrees. Now I'll leave about a 1/16 of an inch beyond the line, and then I'll sweeten it with a second pass. Those slots are for biscuits, which are going to help reinforce the joint as well as line it up. Now I can glue it together. A little bit of glue in the slot and the biscuit. Now I'll apply some glue over the entire joint. And when I put it together, I'm just going to tack it with a couple brads. Now for that post that I showed you earlier. I'll put some glue on 2 sides. Drop it in the corner. And just tack it with a couple brads to hold it while the glue dries. Now a series of plywood fillers that go between the bottom frame of the lower unit and the edge of the cabinet. Just gives me a broader base to attach the other pieces. Next, these solid blocks of poplar. And there's no sparing the glue at this stage. This is all very critical. All right, now I can take the assembly, drop it over those blocks, line it up with the cabinet, and tack it with a couple brads. Now a couple clamps. Well, as you can see, it's not the nails that are going to do the work, it's the glue. Let's take another look at the prototype. There's only one side that shows on the leg. So for the back, I can use a piece of plywood as a brace, and that sits in a notch which I have to cut in the foot. And then there are blocks like the front legs. These are the plywood braces, and I'm making a slot for a biscuit to attach it to the frame. And that's the corresponding slot. All right, I'm going to start with a couple more filler blocks. All right, now a biscuit in the slot. Slip that into place and tack it. I'm going to put another glue block here to give it more strength. All right, now another poplar block like I used on the front. All right, now for the foot. Plenty of glue in that dado. Slide it over the plywood, line it up, and tack it. There's a molding that sits on top of those feet. We'll make that at the router table. Now those pieces of molding are a little wider than what I need, so I've set the fence for the final width, and I've tipped the blade about 3 degrees to give it a little back bevel so the front edge will fit nice and tight on top of those feet. Okay, now I've carefully mitered the corners, a little bit of glue on the back, and some brads will hold it in place. Now that trims it up nicely. A little sanding to smooth it out. Now it's time to build some drawers. One change that we're going to make to the project is with these drawers. I made the sides and bottom out of pre-finished plywood, but I left the laminations exposed, and that's a giveaway that it's a modern piece. So we're going to treat those edges with some edge banding, thin pieces of wood that have an adhesive applied to the back. I can activate that adhesive with heat. In this case, I'm just going to use a simple iron and just press it on. Now I trim the excess on the ends with a utility knife, and then I used a block plane to get the majority of the edge down. Now I just use this little trimmer to get it flush, and then I'll just sand it to smooth it up. Now let's pull out one of the drawers so I can show you the details. The sides are connected to the front with half-blind dovetails. The back is connected to the side in a dado, and all 4 pieces have a groove to pick up the plywood bottom. I've set up the dado for a 1/4 inch width, and we'll run that groove for the bottom first. Now there's the dado in the side piece to receive the back. Now notice the front of the drawer. It's an overlay drawer front, which means it has a rabbet on each end and across the top. So what I've done is installed my sacrificial fence, which covers part of the blade so that I can make that rabbet. Now here's some pieces with a sample of the joint we're trying to make. The side piece has these tails cut in it, and the front has a half pin at each end and 3 full ones in the middle. And they slip together like this, And even without glue, it's a very strong joint. Now, I'm going to use a dovetailing machine, and we've used this several times. It's very complicated. It comes with a very thick manual and a video. You have to work with it and learn it. It takes some time. It has a lot of good features. You can adjust the fingers for any dovetail layout that you want. So I've set those and put these fillers in between. I've installed one of the draw sides with the inside facing out. The next tool is this router. It has a dovetailing bit and it has a little collar right here. And that collar rides around these fingers and these pieces of wood. And every time it goes in, it cuts out one of those tails. Now I like to start from this side and make a scoring pass to minimize the tear out, and then finish cutting the tails. All right, that's good. Now we'll move to the other end of the jig and do the other side. Okay, that takes care of the other side. Now we'll set up to make the pins in the draw front. Okay, now I've set the draw front on top of the jig, set up a stop, flip the fingers over, and now I'm ready to machine the pins. Now let's see how we did. That's going to fit great. Now let's do the other end. With my 1/4-inch roundover bit, I'm able to make this bead detail around the draw front. Now here I've reduced the height of the back piece by 1/8 of an inch. I want the draw to run on its side pieces. I don't want it to run on the back where it might catch. Now I just spread a thin coat of glue and tap them together. Now I'll slide in the bottom. No glue here, just floats. And then I can slip in the back piece, nail it up. Now we'll just check it for squareness by measuring the diagonals. 27, 27, that's good. Let's check it for fit. That's great. Let's build the rest of them. Oh, good morning. I've started making doors this morning. Let's take a look at the prototype. You'll notice that these stiles are all the same width, so that it's very symmetrical. These are flat panel doors. The right-hand door has a key latch, which keeps it closed. The left-hand door has these slide bolts. Now the design calls for the doors to overlap with this rabbeted joint. So on the left door, I have to rabbet the inside, which means I need a wide style. And on the right door, I simply rabbet the inside. Now over here, I have the right-hand door all built. It's not glued yet. And here are the rails and stiles for our left-hand door. The first thing that I want to do is make that bead detail that goes around all the pieces. And we'll do that at the router table. I'm using a 1/4-inch beading bit to make that detail. And the important thing is that as I run this piece through, I want to make sure it doesn't ride up. It'll ruin the bead. So I'll install a featherboard. The next thing that I want to do is make a groove in all 4 pieces for the plywood panel. The groove is slightly offset, and I've adjusted the fence so that the bead will be facing out as I run the pieces through. And I'm going to install a featherboard. Let's take another look at my sample of the door parts. The rails have a tenon. The stiles have a mortise into which that tenon goes. To make the mortise, I've set up my dedicated mortiser with the 1/4-inch chisel, adjusted the fence, and set the hole down. Now all I have to do is nibble it away. Now that's the first of the shoulder cuts to form the tenons. Now I'll make an adjustment, test it, and make the final cuts. With this setup, I've simply nibbled away the material in order to form this haunched tenon. Here, of course, are our cheek cuts, done with our tenoning jig. The next part of the operation is the delicate part. I need to make a little miter and remove the bead from the stile and clip the corner on the rail so that I get a nice tight fit. I've set up to make the miter on the stiles first. I have a stop block, and my blade is tipped to 45 degrees. The next step is to rip right along this groove. So I've carefully set the fence. I'll stop short of this miter and finish it by hand. Okay, that's good. The panel for our door is 1/2-inch thick plywood. I have to rabbet it so it'll fit in the 1/4-inch groove. Well, let's put them together and see how they fit. The panel is next. No glue, dry. All right, we'll set this aside and go back to work on the cornice. Now this is the molding that I made last time. I've mitered a couple pieces for this first corner. I like to nail one piece on so it makes it easier to hold the other piece as I mark the other end. Now that fits pretty well, so while I hold it at the miter, I'll mark the other end. Looks pretty good. All right, now we'll wrap it with a little bead. All right, let's put some hinges on those doors. The only tricky part about these hinges is the mortises. I need one in the stile, one in the edge of the door, and one for this leg. Now I suppose I could chisel them out one by one, but I like to make a template. I use some 1/2-inch MDF, and I cut an opening for the mortise that's a little bit bigger to compensate for a collar, in this case a 3/4-inch collar and a 1/2-inch bit, and I'll just remove the material. Now we'll mount the hinge on the carcass. Now I'm making the notch on the edge of the door. Another jig, same width of opening, but it's deeper. And now a third jig to make that rounded mortise for the leg of the hinge. Now with both doors hinged, I can now calculate my rabbet. All right, let's see how that fits. Oh, that's good. A little more finished sanding, and this piece will be ready for the finishing room. Now, here's a piece of maple plywood that I'm doing samples on to make sure the color is just right. And we start out with a powdered dye, which gets mixed with warm water and applied over the piece. When that dries for a couple days, then the recipe calls for a coat of shellac, which when that's dry gets rubbed off with 3/0 steel wool. Then we put on a glaze. Burnt umber is the color, and it's in a dispersion oil, so you apply it to the surface and then you rub it in. When that's dry, the final coats of polyurethane can go on. All right, that takes care of our brasses for the drawers. We put on about 3 coats of polyurethane. These adjustable shelves will make it easy to set any size TV in there, and when you don't want to see the TV, it's just a matter of closing up these doors.
Anton Fitzpatrick is throwing together a beautiful treasure chest in Woodworks in half an hour after brand new Home Time next.